Normally when I'm setting up my journal for the new month, I try to start about a half week before the new month is gonna be here. Sadly though, recently I've been sick, which meant that getting into my journal and setting it up just was not gonna happen. So this is actually the latest that I have done a setup for my journal in quite a while, at least since I started filming my setups, which I know for some people really isn't anything to report home about. I know for some, setting up after the month has actually already started is kind of the usual, but knowing that if I don't have my setup done before the month gets here, I'm not gonna have as productive a month, that always helps hold me to this idea of I must be set up before the month starts. I know it's all in my head, but I just have this thing that if I don't have the pages done, my layouts are ready to use, in fact if I don't have the layouts populated before the 1st, I feel like I'm starting the month on the wrong foot. What I would usually hope is for a cool, calm and collected start to the month, and instead I'm starting feeling a little bit more like a scatterbrained mess. Given that, I am very glad that I managed to get this setup done before the new month is here, not only because I like to have the video out before the month starts, gotta do that good stuff for the algorithm as we do, but I just know that I am going to be a more productive, more at peace person because of it. All of that to say, February is almost here. I hope that you're feeling excited about the month ahead, even if January wasn't really for you, even if you feel like your start to the year has been a little bit rocky. We still have 11 months left. We have time to make things happen. One of the layouts that I like to use to help me make stuff happen is the one we're setting up here. This one is what I call my monthly or cyclic dashboard. It effectively has a bunch of little sections that have all been selected to help me feel cool, calm, collected moving into the new month, knowing what I want to do, what my plans for getting those things done are, consider the things that I'm looking forward to, the things that I'm nervous about, any potential obstacles or challenges that I predict I might experience, and any information in that kind of realm. You'll see that I have temporarily retired my typical neutral second line highlights for something a little bit more colourful. Usually I'll go with N89, which is a nice warm grey, or 990, which is a nice warm brown, but this time around we're doing pink. One of the things I really enjoy doing in my journal is changing up the theme quite significantly from month to month, mainly so that the new month does feel like a fresh start, and we're going to be using some very fun punchy colours in terms of the supplies today. But before we get to the decoration, we do need to put in some headers. As I've been doing quite a bit recently, I just found a font that I liked online for these headers, one that kind of matched the theme that I was going for. I typed up all of my headers for the month, or at least as many as I could think of. I have definitely forgotten some, but then coloured them the way I wanted them, styled them the way I wanted them, and printed them off on sticker paper. The paper that I'm using for this is a washi sticker paper, so it's nice and thin, slightly transparent so I can align it nicely with the dot grid, and while I'm not quite using my Cricut to cut them out just yet, I am ever so slowly edging closer to that reality. In January I actually have used my Cricut to print off other stickers, more so ones for my reading journal, so once I'm feeling a little bit more confident, I think I might start doing my headers that way. For this month though, I'm just going in with my typical scissors, cutting everything out, and then sticking it down onto the page. By printing these headers on sticker paper rather than regular cartridge paper, it does help to save me time. It means that I don't have to go and add any kind of adhesive to the back of all of my labels and then stick them down individually that way. There were a couple elements in this setup where I did just print it on regular cartridge paper, and it kind of just reiterated to me that yes, there is a reason that we buy sticker paper, and maybe we should just prioritize using that in future. In terms of the decoration on this layout though, I am using PET tapes from the washi tape shop. I instantly fell in love when I saw these because the colour palette is so beautiful. I'm a sucker for purple, it's absolutely gorgeous, and I love the mix with the pink and the blue. There are actually two tapes in this set, so one of them being that kind of sky design, and then the other one being more like a kind of silhouetted townscape. Initially, I wasn't actually planning on using them together because I didn't think that the artistic style kind of matched between them, but after seeing some examples of how they were used online, in particular from the Washi Tape Shop's website, and also the work from the original artist who designed it, I decided that I had been incorrect in my initial assessment and did end up using them together. The cityscape one is done as a large PET sticker, so it's kiss cut around the ridgeline of the mountains, whereas the sky design is just a regular PET tape. And one of the things that certainly added to the time taken in this setup was trimming the tapes down so that they could fit into the boxes that I assigned for them. It is something that I got a little bit faster with as I went through, just getting kind of my practice or reps in, but I'm kind of considering that when it comes to doing my daily logging or my weekly setups, I might go and pre-decorate the layouts, just so that I can do all of this work at once, kind of batch it together, rather than having to do it repeatedly throughout the month. That does of course require me to predict how much space I'm gonna need, but I thought maybe if I do 2 or 3 spreads at any given time, it just gives me a little bit of buffer to play with. Even though it is kind of fiddly, I do love the decoration. I love how it adds some kind of punchy pops of color to the page, and I enjoyed pairing it not only with the colored line highlights, but also colored headers. This isn't something that I've done before. Previously, when I've done my printed headers, they've all just been in black and white, and I was considering just printing a black outline and coloring them all in, but given how many headers I used in this setup, I'm glad I didn't go with that. I did end up using that strategy for one of the layouts we have, but that's in a few pages time. In terms of timing though, from first touch of the pen to final details, the monthly dashboard took about 31 minutes, and before we get into the next part of the setup, we're just gonna flip back and have a look at how January went. Thinking about decoration first, I loved the theme that we went with for January. I've been meaning to use this tape for quite a while and it did not disappoint. I thought that the color palette with a kind of soft pink and brown was really pretty, and in terms of getting in and using the layouts, I was pretty pleased with the amount of use they got. Some of them didn't work quite as well as I wanted them to, so I am making some changes in February, but one of the new elements that I introduced in my January pages were including little photos from everyday life in amongst my daily logs. These photos I just take with my phone camera, and then once I have enough pictures, I print them off on a sheet of sticker paper. Because they're only squares and rectangles, I don't feel the need to use a Cricut to cut them out, but it just added a really nice, kind of like simple memory keeping touch to all of my daily logs. Not only did I include pictures that I had personally taken, but I also included things like little memes or funny pictures that I found online, and I found that including these little pieces just meant that anytime I turned back to that layout, it gave me something to smile about. Including these is definitely something I want to continue with moving forward, because I think it makes my journal a little bit more special than just a kind of productivity focused, pretty looking task list. From start to finish, January took up 16 spreads, which means if I'm using the exact same amount of space for all of the months in my journal, space might end up a little bit tight come the end of it, but that's still several months away, so it's not something I need to concern myself with now. What I do need to concern myself with though is setting up my monthly log. I've come to the conclusion that the monthly log is the biggest pain point that I have when it comes to my monthly setups. Although I do have a regular style that I like to use, having 4 days on the left hand side, 3 days on the right, and then some kind of decoration down that right hand panel, I all too often find that this is the layout that makes me feel the most dissatisfied with how it turns out. Not dissatisfied to the point where I'm like, ugh, I hate this, I'm not going to use it, but definitely less satisfied compared to other layouts. In terms of figuring out where I wanted the decoration on this layout to go, because I do cyclic planning rather than strictly monthly planning, this means that all of my monthly logs are a perfectly rectangular shape. We don't have any little cutouts because we've started the month in the middle of the week or anything like that. Because I'm using blocks of 4 weeks for each of my cycles, it means that I take up the full line for each of those weeks. This means that the typical little inlets or cutouts that people would have on a regular monthly calendar, the ones that could be filled with decorations and quotes and that kind of stuff, I don't have in my layout. For planning this one though, I decided that that right hand panel was going to be fully filled with decoration, but because I didn't want it to kind of weirdly start either partway down or partway up the page, I felt compelled to make my calendar take up the full vertical space as well. This means that I have heaps of space for each day in this calendar, so 9 lines or 4.5 centimeters down. So I'm certainly hoping that I make good use of it and fill it up, otherwise it's gonna look a little bit barren. On this one though, I again used the second line highlights to add a bunch of color to the page. It also increases the readability of the calendar, which I quite like, and I enjoyed pairing the color with the thicker grid lines that I'm using throughout the setup. This one was done with a micron pen in the 08 size, so a nib that is in theory 0.5 millimeter across, but given that mine is kind of blunt, it's probably a little bit wider than that now. I just thought that using the thicker line paired nicely with the darker sections that we have in the PET tape. Because I was housing the PET tape in boxes primarily, and having to use my craft knife to cut away excess tape and such like that, I figured I'd do myself a favor and make it so that I had to do the least amount of craft knife work possible. This meant that I wanted to try and trim my tapes so they had at least 2 straight edges going into putting them down on the paper. To do this, I just used a paper trimmer, which does also work for PET tape. I wouldn't necessarily recommend putting unbacked PET tape through it, that would probably be a little bit messy, but because these tapes also have a PET backing, and they're not super thick, I just put them through the trimmer. Yes, it's probably not so great for the blade, but the blade's probably due replacing anyways because I've never replaced it, and I've had this little trimmer for many moons. You'll see for the side panel though, I didn't keep it as one continuous piece, instead breaking it up into 3 sections. I didn't really pre-plan how big I wanted each of these sections, I just arbitrarily decided where to cut the line, and I do wish I had been just a little bit more intentional about how I laid the tapes down here. While the top 2 panels technically feed into each other with that kind of broken line in the middle of the house, the bottom section is a completely different piece of tape. Well, completely different couple pieces of tape, which means the top kind of insinuates that it's supposed to be one picture, but then the bottom doesn't really match this. At this stage, I haven't gone in and changed it, mainly because I don't want to pull all the tape up and have to lay it down again, and it doesn't bother me too much, but there might be a point in the month that it has bothered me enough and I might go in and change it. In terms of timing though, the monthly log took about 16 minutes to set up, but as always that time doesn't include any idea generation or layout planning time. Flipping over and onto the next spread, you can see that this one already has some decoration in here. You may have actually noticed that I do this kind of commonly in my setup videos. We'll get to a certain page that'll already have some decoration, and that's because I often use these layouts as a kind of test run as to whether I like the decoration. I'll put it in on one of the pages that's not the very first one in the setup, just to see if I like how it looks, and then once I'm happy or satisfied with it, I'll commit to using that style for the rest of the pages. The actual layout we're setting up on the left-hand page though, is going to be what I'm now calling a task bingo. You may have seen this one referred to as a self-care bingo, but when I was writing out the different things that I wanted to have on here, it felt more appropriate just to call it task bingo rather than self-care. Yes, some of these things are going to be self-care related, more so in the kind of productive self-care kind of sense, but because a decent chunk of them weren't self-care related, it felt more appropriate just to go with task bingo as a name. In terms of making the bingo board though, this is one that I also just typed up on Word and printed off, mainly because I wanted to use the same lettering style that I've been using for all of the headers, and this is the layout that I decided to print it off with no color on the inside of the letters. That's because I figured that a fun way to fill this tracker in would be to color in the letters for the items I had completed. It's going to be a little bit fiddly because some of these are quite long in terms of how many letters they involve, but I figured that it was a little bit more fun than just coloring in the entire of the box or coloring in around the outside, which is what I've been doing previously. So far for my January bingo, I've been able to complete 6 out of 9 items, though at the time of recording this voiceover I do only have like half a day left, so I might get one more done. Though one of the items on my board for February is a repeat, that one being getting ahead by a week of videos. This is something that I know is definitely doable, I just haven't done it yet. Probably because of that whole aforementioned sickness thing. For timing though, because I didn't have to decorate this page, it was already done, and I didn't have to draw out the bingo board, that one was just a printout. The actual setup only took about 5 minutes, but if you go and include in the decoration time and making the board, printing it off, that's probably a little closer to 10. On the right hand side of this layout, we're going to be putting in a routines tracker, but more specifically, this is for routines that are related to my life admin gamification. Originally, I had just planned to do a simple vertical habit tracker here, but then I went and put in the decoration space to match what we had on the left hand side, only to realize I didn't actually have enough vertical space to put in a vertical habit tracker. So that was certainly a choice. Always make sure that you measure up what you want to put in before you start decorating. This is more of a reminder for myself than anybody else. But doing that pre-measuring means that you don't run into mishaps like this one. It did mean that I had to change my strategy and think about what other style of trackers I could use, so I ended up just going for a mini calendar layout, though of course these calendars are just little grids with 7 columns and 4 rows, because I'll only be using these trackers for as long as the cycle. Each little tracker grid is going to house one of the things I'm keeping track of, and these are all things that I want to do more of that are related to life areas that aren't work. The main purpose of my life admin gamification is to get me doing things outside of my work, so I specifically wanted to make sure that this routines tracker didn't have anything that was related to getting more done at work. Each of the little pink highlights for the grids is going to be where I write in what those things I'm tracking are. And at the top of the page, I do end up putting in a key to show how to fill in each of the grids based on the completion of my routines. This was the part of the setup that I genuinely wished that I'd printed this off on sticker paper. I ended up sticking them all in with a glue stick, mainly because then I knew I could get good adhesive coverage on the back of each of the little grids. Typically speaking though, I don't enjoy using a glue stick. I often find it makes the paper too wet, and then by putting that into my journal, it makes the page warp ever so slightly. It's not a major thing, like so bad that I won't use it ever again, but I know that not only would the time taken been less if I had have used sticker paper, I wouldn't have had the warping issue, and that would have been more pleasing. After putting in the grids and my key though, I just felt that the space at the top of the page was looking a little bit bare, so I decided to add in a couple more boxes of decoration, which not only add a nice visual element to the page, it also just makes the page look more full, which is always my preference. We recently had a stream on the channel that was about finding your journaling style, and my style very much tends towards full pages rather than white space. The routines tracker took about 16 minutes to set up, that time including all of the cutting out and sticking in of the little calendar grids, though that time doesn't include the decoration that was at the bottom of the page, so I probably added another 5 or so minutes for that one. One of the things that I really love about this tape set is in particular with the sky pieces, because it has that gradient that has the kind of darker punchy blue at the top and the brighter pale pink at the bottom. It means that depending on which part you choose to put in your decorative boxes, you can get quite a different look between the boxes or between subsequent layouts. Flipping over, I have the same style of decoration on this one compared to the last one, but because I used the more blue section in that sky tape, it gives a decently different feel compared to the previous layout. This spread is going to house my work outputs checklist on the left and my project task lists on the right. Admittedly, I fully forgot that I was going to use a full spread for my projects, not just an individual page, but we'll get to that in a second. Right now I'm putting in the things related to my work outputs. This layout is split into 4 sections, so stuff related to memberships, stuff related to videos, getting out the newsletters, and things related to epic goals. Previously, when I've set these ones up, I've used the Alistair method so that we have columns that represent each of the different tasks that I have to complete for each of my work outputs, but I've been finding that I very rarely turn back to actually utilize that functionality, so for February, I'm just simplifying these to be regular checklists. For each of these, I'll write down what the output is, not elaborating on what all of the steps to get that output done are, and instead I'll do that elaboration on my daily logs. Given that that's something that I already do anyway, I figured that just having this layout as a simple checklist to say yes, that piece of work is done, or is ready to publish, or anything like that, shouldn't be too much of a change for how I'm already using my journal. But if I'm finding that I don't feel like I have enough information on this layout, I might end up changing it back at some point. By making these just be regular checklists though, it does make the time taken to set up just that little bit faster, so this one came in at about 6 minutes. As mentioned before though, the projects page is one I had a little bit of trouble with, mainly just because I forgot that I had more projects than I ended up putting on this layout. While I end up including 6 projects on here, some of which have been carried over from January, I actually have at least 2 other ones that I was planning on tackling, but I didn't really remember that until after I'd finished doing the setup for February, so I might end up just putting those project plans in amongst my daily logs once I get to those. The ones that I did include on here though were my PKM, or Personal Knowledge Management System, finishing off my e-decluttering, or like a digital declutter, re-looking at my office revamp project, so getting my office space into a better state. Right now it is just a complete mess. Sorting out a digital book tracker for my reading, getting on and doing some event planning that I've been excited for, and also looking at tasks for Vogel and mine's wedding, or actually starting wedding planning. I don't want to jinx it by saying too much, but in the past couple of weeks we have made significantly more progress than we have previously. Given the fact that we've been engaged since like 2018, that's certainly saying something. The projects list took about 10 minutes to set up though, mainly because figuring out the spacing for each of the sections was a little bit more involved compared to the work outputs layout, but then it's time to flip on over to what is going to be my monthly reflection page. I'm still kind of considering changing the structure of my setups so that this reflection page is actually after all of my daily logs, but I also like having it ready to go at the start of the month, just so as things start happening happening, like as I start accomplishing things, making memories, anything like that, I have a drop space for that information. Though I guess this begs the question, how often do I use the ability to do that? For instance, in January, despite having had my January in review section set up since the initial setup of the month, the only thing I've added in there is my goals list because I didn't realize I was on the wrong page. I thought I was filling in my dashboard when I wasn't actually on my dashboard. So yes, I am setting it up at the start of the month so that I can use it from the get-go as things start happening, but more often than not, I don't fill this in until the last week of the cycle anyway, so I could just hold off and set it up at the end of the cycle. At this stage though, obviously I'm not doing that because we're setting it up here, but it might be that in March moving forward, I reassess this and possibly put it more towards the end of however many pages the full cycle takes up. This layout though is meant as a summative look at the cycle as a whole, so the sections I include are a space to reiterate what my goals were, a space to outline any of the projects I did end up working on. I have a box to write down any accomplishments from working on my goals, a spot to record any memories from the month, a place to acknowledge the challenges that I faced, a space to highlight the progress that I made in my life admin gamification, a box to note down anything that I learned about myself, mainly in terms of my goal-getting abilities and strategies that do or don't work for me. And as part of this, I also want to include a specific tactic review to think about the tactics that I decided on at the start of the month I was going to be trying out, and whether they were successful for me or maybe need some tweaking. So thinking about, was I over or under budget and in which categories? And I've also got a spot to outline anything I'm taking forward or leaving behind. This could be in terms of tasks, mindset, strategies, anything like that. Really just depends on what I'm reflecting on come the end of the month. In amongst all of the functional sections though, I of course wanted to include some more decoration. So you can see the open boxes that we have in the bottom left, top right, and also top left are going to be filled with more of that PET tape. Now at the start of this setup, I said that as I did more of this decorative style, I got my reps in, I got more practice, I sped up. One of the problems that comes with speed is mistake making, and that is exactly what happened on the right hand side of this layout. I had a piece of the sky tape that I wanted to lay underneath the cityscape, but I didn't want to kind of waste it because a whole bunch was going to be covered. Like once you lay the mountains over the top, a decent chunk of it isn't going to be seen. So I thought I'd be sneaky and I'd just go in and trim that tape down so I could just have the part that was going to be peeking over the ridgeline, but I totally didn't appreciate the part of the tape I was laying over the top dipped quite a bit lower than I was expecting. That meant that when I went and laid the mountains over the top, I ended up with a strip of sky that was just not there. It's like, oh, you're in a video game and it didn't render and now there's just blank space. The fix that I ended up going with for this was just cutting out another piece of the darker purple and sticking that over the top, effectively making my own mountain. And while there is still just a very small part of white there, I'm thinking what I could possibly do is just pull that little part of the PET tape up and maybe color it in with my Tombow. It's a pretty good color match for the sky, to the extent where I think it'll just make that little white space less noticeable. It's not an ideal fix, but it's possibly the one that I'm going to go with. Essentially, this just reiterated to me the importance of measuring twice. Of course, that lesson being learned multiple times throughout this setup, not only on the cycle review, but also on my routines tracker. It's all good though, we have a fix, it's just a little bit annoying. In terms of timing though, this reflection spread took about 25 minutes to set up, including mistake fixing time, because there were actually a decent few mistakes that I made in this setup, but most of them I just covered up with white sticker labels. Flipping back so that we can flip through, I love the color palette of this month. I think that the purple being as punchy as it is just really fun, and it's nice to be back with something that's a little bit more vibrant. I feel like I haven't done anything quite in this style for quite a while. In fact, purple is a color that I don't use all that much in my journal, despite it being my favorite color. I guess it calls into question whether purple actually is my favorite color. I'd love to know though, do you find yourself using your favorite color in your journal more or less compared to other colors? Seemingly for me, it's less, but if purple wasn't your favorite color and you're looking for some more February setup inspiration, then the playlist we have on screen here is the next one to check out. That one has all of my other February setups, both in my journal and journals that I've set up for other people, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.